Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is the First Days of Choir, Part 2, The Power of Infrastructure. It could be dangerous to teach the way you were taught, Harry Wong says. Research is not something only scientists do. Business people do research, so do baseball players, chefs, plumbers, lawyers, dentists, artists, and actors. Students, when they write term papers, do research to search and search and search over again. That is why it is called research. This episode is going to focus on the infrastructure that we set up before students even arrive. In the first installment of the series, we talked about day one and some of my goals and my recommendations and thought processes for day one. But now we're going to go back in time a little bit. We're going to be hopping around, which I think will make sense when we're all done with this, to the things that happen before you even see your students. Step one is going to be research practices. So the things that we do to load our brains with concepts, with understandings. And here's the most important part, I think, things that I notice when I communicate about pedagogy online, is that we do need to know why the thing we're doing works or doesn't work, so that we can diagnose in real time. So we're going to start with the Harry Wong chapter on the importance of research and some things to look for and think about. And then we're going to move into the structures, the way we set up our classroom, the way we create our syllabus, the way we structure the first email home to parents, the way we explain the program in writing so that people and our administrators and all of that can understand and have our backs. Plus lots more types of infrastructural details that we're going to discuss in this episode. So stay tuned, and don't forget, I want to hear your first days of choir, first days of school routines as well. Just make sure you shoot me an email, choralosophy@gmail.com, and we will work those in when I have a music educators, performers, and event organizers. Listen up. What if I told you there's a platform that sells your tickets, markets your concerts, manages volunteers, runs fundraisers, and even tracks merchandise and concession sales, all in one place? Meet Ludus, the all-in-one event solution built for the arts. And if you need help, their live customer support is like having your own backstage crew. I know I've used it a ton of times to get quick answers on the day of a show, and we need to solve a problem, and they pop right up. And here's the best part. It's completely free for your organization. Join them today because your music deserves more than just a ticketing platform. I'm not sure how much, if anything, out there has not gone up in price since 2020, but I know one thing that hasn't, and that is the membership to the Patreon and to the Substack to support this show. The people who are signed up over there as paid subscribers, as my thank you to them, they can get things like t-shirts from the Choralosophy.com shop. They can also get access to my Google folder of teaching materials that I've talked about on the show for over the years. And of course, they just want to help make sure that this show can continue. And one of those benefits is a shout out on the show. The producers and inner circle from Patreon are Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, Jonah Clicksbull, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Jared Hendricks, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. Now, according to Harry Wong in the book, The First Days of School, he introduces in Chapter 5 a key idea about why you should use proven research-based practices. After all, he does remind us that it could be dangerous to teach the way you were taught. There's a lot of reasons that I would say I would echo that statement, that it could be dangerous to simply teach the way we were taught. One of the things teachers oftentimes forget is that we are probably teachers in the first place because of some preloaded things that we had going for us related to the subjects that we teach. We probably had some advantages in the area that we became in love with later, or else we probably wouldn't have fallen in love with it because it would have been frustrating for us. Just because it was the way our teacher did it does not mean that that was the best way for all students to learn music. It could be that we got good at music despite the way our teachers taught us. And that is not to throw shade at our former teachers. I love my former teachers. But it is my responsibility as the next generation to go and verify that I am doing everything the best way that I possibly can. And that is an ongoing process. So one of the key ideas here is that people who know what to do and people who know how to do it will always be working for those who know why it is being done. So this is that kind of setting up a way for us to think about the hierarchy of our jobs. things, right? So we're the practitioners. We have to know what to do and how to do it. But that does not mean we are always the ones who discover why it works and why we do it. Sometimes that is an administrator who's done a bunch of PhD research. Sometimes that is an educational researcher, but all of our jobs kind of work together. Research is the process of critical thinking and problem solving employed by thousands of people. It is this ability that sets humans apart from all other living things. Research is simply the use of the human mind to seek answers, or as some would say, to search for the truth. Okay, so a couple of points here from the book, and then I will put them in our music context, and I think that you will find this helpful. At least I have. Unfortunately, and erroneously, many teachers teach as they were taught. Many teachers teach as their academic college professors taught them, thinking that that is the correct way to teach. But no education professor, administrator, staff developer, or teacher at a workshop has ever said that the model of teaching presented in the box on the next page is the correct way to teach. Yet, many teachers think this is teaching, is to figure out the latest fad. So, of course, the latest fad, the latest philosophy, political agenda, never asking for and then we oftentimes in public school, at least in the US, and I can't speak to other places, are notoriously terrible at asking then for follow-up evidence or supplying follow-up evidence that the thing that we did actually worked. And of course, we are a social science. I've talked about this on the show before, but that responsibility to provide that follow-up evidence and those ever-increasing sample sizes that replicate the findings of what we're doing. And I think as teachers, we need to look for that. There's not a whole lot of it in educational research, but most of the time we're going to find it in a little bit what I would say the harder sciences. We're going to find it in neuroscience. We're going to find it in something called the science of learning, similarly related to the body of research that I've talked about on the show a lot called the science of reading. So my position, of course, has been one that I would say is echoed here by the Harry Wong book, that we actually do need to know or care whether or not the methods that we are using is resulting in higher rates of student learning. So I'll share in my personal context that now with literacy, that's where I keep most of my data, like my hard data that I could prove to people that not only my kids get better at reading music over time, but that I'm getting better at teaching it over time. And I think both of those things matter. The way I've talked about this on the show before, so if you go into my literacy series, which is, of course, choralosophy.com/music literacy, you'll find me talking more about this, so I won't go too into detail about it. But essentially, what I do is we start collecting data from beginners when they come in ninth grade, all the way through the time they graduate, and we collect that data 3 to 4 times per year on certain benchmarks that we're asking them to hit, or we're evaluating their progress through, I think is a better way to say it, related to their independence and fluency in their reading, in their music reading. And I have the spreadsheets, and kid by kid, and what level of sight reading factory they were struggling in what way on, and I take notes and I go through, and every semester that improves, the notes are being taken, the scores are being changed because they're doing better, those types of things. And then I can go back and show an arc on that kid. And so then the other nice thing about that data being collected now for well over 10 years is I can also see improvements in how the students overall are doing by percentage, which is not necessarily proof of anything other than it's a good indicator that we as teachers are also getting better at delivering that instruction. And my ability to predict the problem that the kid might encounter or diagnose a problem is starting to improve. And I can see that in the data. So as Harry Wong said, I don't have to be a scientist to do research. I'm doing research every day. And I would encourage you to do that as well, even if it's for your own informal use, because as teachers, we can feel like we're doing better and we can feel like we're working really hard, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's panning out in terms of student achievement and student learning. As the Wongs say in the book, teaching is a profession, and like all professions, its members must learn new knowledge and skills continuously. Becoming a truly accomplished teacher is a journey, not a destination. A professional teacher will still be learning to do it better the day she or he retires. Ineffective teachers, this is still straight out of the book, and I love this part. Ineffective teachers talk more about the gimmicks and games. This is so common on choir director groups. Ineffective teachers talk more about the gimmicks and games they are trying to find to keep the kids busy and quiet. Now, in our choir context, I think it's mostly busy because we know that they shouldn't be quiet, but it's how do I, which warm up will teach them to do X, Y, Z? And of course, it's more complicated than that. Another one in antithesis to that, they said, is effective teachers talk more about the research they constantly look for to improve the achievement of their students. And there, again, I align with that statement completely. I talk about it all the time. Probably my colleagues are driven crazy by it because it's something that I nerd out about a lot, but it also makes me a better teacher. Now, of course, one thing that is important to keep in mind with research is that research cannot and does not identify the right or best way to teach, nor does it suggest that certain instructional practices should always or never be used. But research can illuminate which instructional practices are most likely to achieve desired results, with which kinds of learners and under which conditions. And that's a quote from Miriam Met from the Handbook of Research on Improving Student Achievement. And so for review on in this portion of the episode, the reason I'm placing this here is because it is kind of too late to get up to speed on all the research related to the types of learners and the types of learning that you're hoping to impact in your classroom once the first day bell rings. Those are things that we do outside of class. And I know that that is difficult because we are busy and they only pay us so much, and it's easier to just hit the ground running and going with the things we already know and kind of flying by the seat of our pants. But I'm going to strongly encourage everyone to consider that your kids deserve better than that. They deserve a professional educator, as described by Harry Wong here in this book. So to review, the effective teacher understands how research works. They use proven research-based teaching strategies, and they use research data to improve teaching and learning, and especially data on themselves. In what way? Don't be afraid to look for the ways in which you are failing your students. I do it all the time. And yeah, I even say it in those harsh kinds of terms. I know that shocks you, but there are times that I've failed my students, and I want to know why, and I want to know how to do it better next time. And I think one of the best ways we do that is we are organized with keeping track of student performance. Now, nowadays, I would say to the younger teachers, it's even easier than ever because of the digital tools that are now available to keep track of test scores. Now, of course, if I would go back to episode 69 on the podcast, which shows how I grade some of my regular assessments related to literacy, because the way you grade it, of course, does need to be thought out really well ahead of time, so you're not changing it willy-nilly all the time, because then, of course, you're confounding variables all over the place in terms of keeping track of your data. It's okay to tweak things around the edges here to make improvements, but if you're grading drastically different from one year to the next, or supplying them with completely different types of learning materials each time, then, of course, your experiment is not quite as valid. Okay, for those of you who are following along in the actual Harry Wong book, which I recommend that you do, at least if you have not gotten it yet, you should go get it. And you should read it for its own uses, because it is very important for all teachers, I think. What I'm trying to do is grab the key ideas out of it and put it in our music, ensemble music, general music context. So if you're following along, I am skipping around a bit. So we just left chapter 5 about research. We're now jumping all the way to chapter 11, which he calls part of Unit C. He has the book divided up into chapters within units. And so we're now in Unit C, and this is called How to Have a Well-Managed Classroom. So some of his key ideas. The key idea is that the effective teacher is able to organize a well-managed classroom where students can learn in a task-oriented environment. And the authors say, and there's like a bold print thing here that says, so I got to mention it, that this is possibly the most important unit in the entire book. So that's why we're going here now. We have identified the single most important factor that governs student learning. In a study reviewing 11,000 pieces of research that spanned 50 years, 3 researchers determined that there are 28 factors that influence student learning and place them in rank order. This is relatively famous education research, by the way. It is pretty important in a lot of ways because it actually aggregates large sample sizes, which is rare, as I mentioned, in music ed research. The most important factor governing student learning is classroom management. And this is a citation from Wang, Margaret, Geneva Hartel, and Herbert Wahlberg from back in 1993. What helps students learn? Educational leadership is the name of the publication. The least important factors, and this is probably where some of the disagreement from this book comes in our modern times, is according to research with very large sample sizes, the least important factors are demographics of the student body. race, skin color, gender, and national and religious background, and the financial status of the family are the least important factors in determining student achievement. Now, it is important to point out that that does not mean, either me mentioning it or Harry Wong including it in the book, that those things don't matter at all. They are simply, as shown by quite a bit of research now for 50 years, that they are factors in the grand soup that is a student's educational experience, but they are not the most important ingredients. In fact, they are the least predictive of what those outcomes might be. Again, correlation versus causation. If you're research literate, you would have to know right away that that's what we're talking about right there. So once and for all, this is back to Harry Wong's book. So once and for all, let's stop using the demographics or culture of the students as an excuse for the lack of achievement. And there we go. That's why this book is now viewed as controversial by some. But again, I would argue that he's kind of following the research. And one commentary that I will add of my own personal opinion is that is also a very important concept for us to grasp as teachers, because what does it say about our expectations for our students if we believe the opposite of that to be true? If we believe that something in their demographics is predetermining or creating a ceiling on what their achievement possibly could be, I see that as very problematic. So we should, again, I agree with Harry Wong, avoid that conclusion. So if we accept that the way we set up our classroom and the way we manage the classroom is the primary determinant of how well our students will learn, then these are some things we might consider. According to the book, effective teachers have 3 characteristics. They have classroom management skills, they teach for mastery, and they practice positive expectations. And we're going to talk later a little bit more about what probably in a future episode on this series, about some of those, especially positive expectations, to make sure that that's clearly defined. So in my environment, and there are, of course, many disclaimers that throughout this whole series you're going to hear, that my environment doesn't mean that it needs to be a copy-paste onto your environment, but I'm going to give you some ideas and also some trial and errors of things that I've done that have failed over the years. So I teach in a team teaching environment primarily, although I have not always done that in my career. I've taught by myself, and I've also taught most of my years with a team teacher in the room. And one thing I would say, and I would pull it right out of the book here, is students want a well-managed classroom more than the teachers do, because it provides them with security in the classroom that is consistent. So what I will point out is, regardless of whether or not you're a by-yourself teacher, or it's you and an accompanist, or just you, or you and a team teacher, or any of those types of things, that the expectation for students needs to be consistent, not for the teacher's benefit, but for the student's benefit, so that they can come in with an expectation of to what standard will they be held, regardless of which teacher is in front of them, and where will they find their own internal sense of how well am I doing right now? Because and this is true on my baseball team too, I know that sometimes kids struggle to understand why they've been set on the bench, for example. Or for a student in a choir classroom, why did they get the C on that singing test? If they can't understand or explain their own situation, then that is probably a barrier to their learning. In fact, not probably, it is a barrier to their learning. So for example, I'll just use baseball because I love how clean and statistical it is. If I've got a kid who's batting 120 and we're in a most important game of the season and they find themselves on the bench, and then they find themselves scratching their heads and going, I can't figure out why I'm on the bench. Does coach not like me? What's going on? And they're not savvy enough about baseball to know that it might be your 120 batting average. That might be the issue. And we need to put the guys on the field that give us the best chance to win, right? So in the analogy there to a choir class could be that I just sang a part check of some kind. It's graded. We have a rubric. We tell you, the student, ahead of time, all the things that we're listening for and the way that an A is earned and how frequently you must be demonstrating all these skills, etc., which is kind of like what my rubric does. And then you get a C, and then you go, I wonder why did I get a C? And then mom and dad are confused. And does Mr. Muntz just not like my voice? And then, of course, if they ask me, is that on the rubric? What did the rubric say? And then usually the student has no idea. And so our job is to consistently guide the students back to whatever framework we have set up for them ahead of time related to what the expectation is. It's important for us to not fall into the trap of trying to always justify the expectation after the fact. Instead, we want to set it up clearly, communicate it in advance. We need to know and be ready for the fact that they will hear us communicate it in advance and still not pay attention to what that expectation is. And the parents definitely aren't going to read the emails, but we then continuously simply refer them back to the syllabus? Did you read the syllabus? So the classroom management ultimately, in my opinion, starts with clearly communicated and outlined and well thought out, logically supported expectations that you can send out to the parents and to the students on day one. And I think it is more than just a list of activities. It is here is great detail about what we are grading and why, how a student earns an A in this class, and what they have to do and demonstrate in order to earn an A in this class. And as you've heard me say before, if you're a longtime listener, I don't think choir should be an automatic A. I think kids should have to do stuff, and they should have to do stuff that is evaluated individually on a regular basis in order to earn that grade. You will be a better choir for it, but more importantly, their education will become richer for all the reasons that it says here in this book, which is that who are flying by the seat of their pants every day in a class, meaning they don't know how they're being graded or why, or worse, they know they're not being graded, they're less likely to learn. One quote from the book here that I love is, "Nothing will send kids into orbit faster than letting them suspect that their teacher is disorganized." Disorganized teachers think only about presenting lessons, lectures, worksheets, videos, or activities, never management. And when classrooms aren't managed, they become chaotic and less productive. So most of my students receive, or all of my students receive, most of their grade from our rehearsal skills rubric. And this is another question that I hear a lot. This rubric can be found in my Patreon drive for paid subscribers. I share this, in fact, all of my documents that are sent out to classrooms and to students and parents at the beginning of the school year, I share with you as a way for me to kind of provide you opportunities to grab ideas and, of course, use what works for you and discard the things that you don't think are useful to you in your context. So my rubric is there, and I've done episodes on it in detail, so I'll give you the short version. That's episode 21, by the way. I'm essentially looking for 4 things every single day. And this is a graded aspect, but it is also critical to my classroom management. I'm grading their body alignment when we are singing. And the way I define all of these 4 things for them is that I'm looking for how frequently you are doing the thing correctly without me having to tell you, or the other teacher, by the way. We're all looking for this stuff. How frequently are you doing it correctly? Not how good you do it when you do it correctly. How frequently you do it correctly. And are you doing it without constant nagging from us? So notice that is both academic and classroom management all in one fell swoop. Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. So this is similar back to part 1 when I was talking about maximizing my stupidly 44-minute long classes by teaching vocal concepts that we will then reinforce during literacy time, and then using those vocal concepts and literacy concepts to then reinforce into our repertoire learning so that nothing is wasted. We are using every part of the animal, so to speak. Now, that's true in my classroom management concepts as well. So if they are being graded academically based on the skills they demonstrate for rehearsal, and yet we are also heading into a time of class that is a lot of rehearsal, and they're thinking about the ways that they're being evaluated for their rehearsal skills, guess what goes a whole lot better? The rehearsal. And if kids are engaged in active stuff to do all the time, typically classroom management takes care of itself, because where do most of our classroom management problems come from? They come from idle children, kids that are not being asked to engage deeply with anything, and they're not being held accountable for that deep engagement with things. And that means just the real furrowed brow, thinking hard, trying to figure out how to do something. That is your best classroom management tool. Can you set up an environment where they have to do that in order to get a good grade? They've got to be engaged in that stuff or their grade's not going to happen. So sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. Now we're going to go back to the 4 things. Here are the 4 things I look for. Body alignment, which shows that they are thinking about how their body is aligned when they are singing. So that's a technical thing. It's a rehearsal skill. We are looking for their use of pencil in the score. So referring to how frequently they are taking rehearsal concepts, notes, descriptions, instructions from the conductor, etc., and marking them, and or doing whatever they need to do to make their score readable by them. So for example, I've got dyslexic students who have encouraged over the years to use the colored pencils and the highlighters and different things to make certain aspects of their music pop out to them so that it's less tricky for their brains to read. So those types of things would all fall into that category. It's not just like, did you spell sforzando correctly or whatever. It's more deep engagement level thinking than that. I want to see how you're thinking about the music. And we do occasionally go around the room and have them show us our folders or their folders. And their grade can be impacted by whether or not that folder is completely blank or whether or not they've got rehearsal markings from the last several days or whatever marked into their music. Is it evidence of their thinking and that they are rehearsing and that they are deeply engaged? So that's 2. The other thing I look for every single day is we look for the deep engagement itself. Can we see behaviors that prove engagement? And how frequently do we see them? So do we see eyes on music when when the conductor or teacher says, ready, go to page 5, and your eyes are on the ceiling for 20 minutes? You are not engaged in that project, and that is easy to see when everybody else is doing solfege hand signs or doing some kind of physical kinesthetic movement during voice building time. What percentage of the time are you doing those things full out? So we define that for kids in the engagement category as physical and or mental engagement. Can we see you doing and thinking about the things? Can you demonstrate it? Could you prove to us that you were engaged in those things? And the fourth one is we look for a student's ability to understand and that they've wrapped their mind around the way that noise is being used in our rehearsal and in our class period to create the art that we're trying to create. So are they demonstrating? How frequently are they demonstrating that they understand when it's time to make talking noises and when it's time to make big, beautiful, loud singing noises? And so this is, you could say, probably the closest thing in our rubric to grading behavior, which I know is controversial, but it's not. I really don't think it is. I think it's grading and understanding of sound and silence and how those things, which are the ingredients, by the way, of what we do, are sound and silence and how we arrange them, is that they understand how to contribute to that project, which means that yes, it could be, their grade could sometimes be impacted by them talking out of turn or talking during audiation time or talking to their neighbor about lunch or whatever, because they would be adding sound that is not part of the music project that we're working on. But it also could be impacted by them not making sound when it's time to sing. So then what they would be demonstrating is that they don't quite understand yet when and how to be making sound. And that is very informative to us. So essentially the way I'm doing that is I'm looking through every rehearsal afterwards, and I'm thinking about which kids were all the time, most of the time, sometimes, or never kids. I'm not going through with a detailed list of gotchas on every single kid. That's too much. But what it does is it helps them understand that they are being evaluated on very concrete things that we are looking for. It's not esoteric. It's not really opinion-based. They are things that we, the teachers, can see or not see. The consistency aspect comes in as crucial here, where if, say, you have 2 teachers, or if you have a teacher and an accompanist, or if you're by yourself, that this standard is applied with equal vigor from everyone delivering instruction. Now, sometimes if you're by yourself, the challenge is this. Some days you're just tired. You're just tired, and it's so easy to let them slip, right? Here would be my recommendation on those days. Don't have a rehearsal. If you are too tired to hold them to the standard of your normal rehearsal, don't have one. Come up with some other lesson plan. And honestly, teachers, that's okay. That is sometimes has to happen. Sometimes you are too emotionally tired to be the standard bearer in the room, in which case there are tons of resources that you could use to engage them in things that they still need to learn and work on anyway. Teach them about overtones. I've got lots of content on overtones too. You could teach them about vocal pedagogy. You could teach them about a class period about the way the voice works and show them some videos of vocal folds, and they'll laugh because it looks like, private parts and whatever, all that stuff. And that can be a change of pace, but don't just muscle through and have a rehearsal where you have now let them talk through it. You've let them slouch over. You've let them not get out their pencils and do it. Because then what you're actually teaching them is that the standards that you have applied for them are not actually super important. And once they realize that the standards aren't even all that important to you, good luck getting this back on. So this is where I tie this back into Harry Wong's book, which is that if these things are not established as consistent from day one, it's almost impossible to adhere to them. And of course, when there's multiple teachers impacting the kids, it is super important that every single teacher is on board with the system. Whatever it is, even if your system's tweaked differently than mine, that they're on board for that system so that the students don't say, oh, well, this teacher A has this expectation. Teacher B will not hold us to this. So we then are out of practice on doing those things. And so the infrastructure aspect of the syllabus, the rubrics, communicating all of these things to your administrators ahead of time, even if they don't really pay attention, but they rubber stamp it, and then you have in writing that they support your system. These are all things that are really important, because here's a reality that I will share with you if you're a younger teacher. And I'm sorry, this is just true. In the last 5 years, I have noticed that parents are more and more averse to having their kids be held accountable for things than when I started teaching. Meaning, specifically, I see higher and higher numbers and higher frequency of parents who will go to bat to defend their kid who did nothing to earn the grade, but they just don't want their kid to be held accountable. That is becoming part of our culture, and it's scary and it's sad, but the way to prevent that impacting your learning environment is still the same, which is it's in writing ahead of time. You can explain every single little detail of it to someone who asks, why are you grading kids on this? Well, because if I don't, then this XYZ domino effect problem will happen. And it's all the goal is musical mastery, or the mastery of the musical concepts that I'm trying to teach them. And for example, I get asked questions about my sound and silence one a lot. Why are you so strict with noise in the rehearsal? Well, my teaching philosophy is all based on audiation. Have you tried to audiate to be a beginning audiator, by the way, when there's like the chaos of noise around the room? It's nearly impossible. And that is a skill that requires that kind of constant silence. So we need to be able to explain all these things. And this is, again, work that happens ahead of time. There's a reference here back to chapter 1 of the book that ties this in, especially for kids who are at-risk kids. So kids that are, and this is another common, I think, way that people get this really, really wrong in our modern teaching culture, is that we think if kids are at risk, then we should go easier on them. And this is mentioned, even this is back in the 90s, this book was written, but I want you to listen to this. The student from the high poverty school in an at-risk community once said in an interview with Harry Wong for the book, I like coming to this school because everyone knows what to do. As a result, no one is yelling and screaming at us, and we can get on with learning. This is really important because a lot of high-risk kids come from environments where there is a lot of chaos. School, when it's well managed, and some people would call strict or teacher-centered, or it's all about the rules, or whatever BS thing that you want to be calling it. Those kids need that structure, and they need it somewhere in their life, and oftentimes they are not getting it at home. And so that's also worth considering. And the key word in that student's statement is do. They all know what to do. In an effective classroom, the students are responsible for doing the procedures organized for their learning. In an ineffective classroom, the teacher is constantly concerned with student behavior rather than the academic things they are doing. Setting up your syllabus in a way that is very doing-centered is really, really important. Every aspect of things that I grade, all the way from concert attendance to daily rehearsal skills to a singing test to a quiz or a test, is their grade comes from what they do, or by extension, what they don't do, right? What they neglect to do, rather than necessarily even how they do it, because that's where we get into the realm of subjectivity. And we want to be able to point to as many objective criteria as we possibly can, because it is school, even though our music that we teach is an art. And that's okay. Actually, it can be both. So there's a great chart in the book. What I'm going to leave you on in this portion of the episode about syllabus infrastructure that kind of lays out in a chart some of the techniques to help you implement a well-managed classroom. Number 1, a high level of student involvement with work. An effective teacher will have the students be working. So there's some video clips from that take place in my class. I've done episodes where you get to peek into my class. And one of the things that many people notice when they watch me teach is that I seem to be like just chilling. The kids are doing the work. Oftentimes I'm just sitting on my chair, very nonchalant, asking them to do a thing, and then they go do the thing. An ineffective teacher looks like they are working really hard. Number 2, clear student expectations. For an effective teacher, students know that assignments are based on objectives. Like, what are we trying to learn here? Students know that tests are based on objectives as well. They know that they are going for a certain set of skills or things that they are going to try to do. An ineffective teacher says, read chapter 3 and know what's in it, for example. Or I'll give you a test covering everything in chapter 3. These are the signs of an ineffective teacher. They're saying what the test is going to be over, but they're not giving you a goal on what they want you to be able to do with that material. Number 3, relatively little wasted time, confusion, or disruption. An effective teacher has procedures and routines. The teacher starts class immediately. The teacher has assignments already posted, already created, etc. An ineffective teacher makes up rules and punishes according to his or her mood. The ineffective teacher takes roll and dallies and takes a bunch of time to kill time during the rehearsal, during the class. Students ask for assignments repeatedly because they're not being given clear instructions. Number 4, work-oriented but relaxed and pleasant climate. An effective teacher has invested time in practicing procedures until they become routines. Teacher knows how to bring class to attention. The teacher knows how to praise the deed and encourage the student. But an ineffective teacher tells but does not rehearse procedures. Here's the things you're going to do. And then again, thinking back to part 1 of the series where I'm kind of having them practice all of my grading rubric within the first few days of class, we're rehearsing those expectations. An ineffective teacher also yells and picks fights and flies off the handle when kids are disruptive. An ineffective teacher also uses generalized praise or none at all. So looking for, and I love that because generalized praise meaning, hey, good job, guys, at the end of rehearsal, rather than looking for, Tommy, your body alignment is on fleek right now. I know nobody says that anymore. It's lit. I'll never keep up. But you're pointing out the actual things that you're grading on, and you can point out a kid doing those things really, really well by name specifically. These are great ways to illustrate what it is that you're looking for. Okay, chapter 12 is how to have your classroom ready. The key idea here is teachers who are ready with the setup of their classroom maximize student learning and minimize student misbehavior. So this is also related to classroom management. Don't be ineffective, and you and your students will pay for it. Ineffective teachers have classrooms that are not ready. Confusion leads to problems lead to misbehavior, and misbehavior leads to constant struggling between teacher and students. The ineffective teachers each day become more stressed, burned out, frazzled, negative, cynical, and angry. They quickly learn to blame everyone and everything else for their problems. The effective teachers were shown, and again, there's some research citations here in the book that you can see when you get it. The effective teachers used time as effectively as possible, which is related to the way your classroom is set up, because those things do impact time. So in our choir context, right? Let's say the bell rings and chairs. If you use chairs, I would recommend you don't use chairs. But if you did use chairs, they weren't set up when the class started. The kids then have to go set up their own chairs. Well, that's a problem waiting to happen. A, it wastes time. And number two, that's how I roll, I guess. It also creates time for students to socialize, as they are not really doing class work, but they're doing the getting the class ready work. Now, here's what I would say. I recognize that in some school environments, like having everything, many teachers, music teachers float around the building and they're teaching in different spaces, etc. And yes, absolutely, there are going to be structural barriers to doing a really strong job here in this area, but it doesn't make it not important. So the barriers that are set up for you in your particular situation doesn't nullify the fact that having a set up classroom in advance is really important. So if you don't have that opportunity, then this becomes something else to continue to advocate for in your life. But let's just say, for the purposes of this episode, you have a classroom that you could arrange ahead of time. Now, I mentioned that I don't advocate chairs. Now, this is one of the reasons that I don't advocate chairs. It's bad for their body alignment, and it creates setup time. It creates that every chair you set has to be moved at some point. It's got to be picked up. It's got to be put away. It's got to move when the custodians come in to clean, etc. So in my classroom, we use flat floor and we use risers, because then the kids can put themselves in a position to sing with almost no time. So that's one of the many elements. The other things that the effective teacher does is they implement group strategies with high levels of involvement and low levels of misbehavior. They also use selected lesson formats and academic tasks conducive to high student involvement. Finally, they use communicated, clear procedures of participation. So how are these things connected from classroom management to physical setup of the room? The Harry Wong analogy here that I really like is connecting the classroom and making an analogy between the classroom and a restaurant. A successful restaurant appears ready when you come in. The table's ready. It's already set. You've got your silverware there. The dining room is ready. There's already cooks there ready to make your food. The staff is ready. You're greeted. So they bring you to a table. Someone in a timely manner shows up and says, "Hi, how are you? Welcome," etc. There is a sense that you have arrived to a place that has been waiting for you at a successful restaurant. A successful classroom is the same. The work is ready. The desks, the sheet music, the papers, the assignments, all the things, everything's loaded in whatever school online platform you use. And when the bell rings, the teacher is ready to start learning. to start teaching, to start delivering instruction, to have the kids start doing something. That is so important, especially echoing back to part one, if we have these big classes, right? Chaos spreads. And so when the bell rings, all of those things need to be ready. And finally, the teacher is ready. The teacher has a warm, positive attitude and positive expectations that all students will succeed. There can't even be a doubt in the kid's mind that you know exactly what you're doing when that bell rings. So, and this is an every single day thing. And I would say, again, it's one of those things where Harry Wong says it's every day. Have your classroom ready every single day, especially the first days of school. I would agree with that, but with the same caveat I gave before, whereas, we are human and some days we're not having it. But again, this is where I would say, if you're not on it that day and you can't get it ready that day, do something else. Do something that doesn't look like rehearsal. That's when we get ourselves into trouble. Okay. Because it's when they start to think, well, some days we're going to start when the bell rings. And some days we're going to be held accountable for the rehearsal rubric, but not every day, not when Mr. Muntz feels tired. No, every day we rehearse, we do those things. Sometimes I need the students to be the ones kicking each other in the butt because I'm so tired. But every day we rehearse, we're going to do those things. And if we don't have our crap together, then we might want to think about an alternate lesson plan. Now, that's just me editorializing. That is not Harry Wong. I just think that's important. So before you move a single piece of furniture in your classroom to get started for the single year, here are some things that Harry Wong suggests that you consider. A climate of work is what you want to establish during the first week of school. The first week of school should stress large group organization and student procedures. Spend your time on classroom management of student procedures rather than making your classroom look like a showcase. It's not about all the things that are on the wall. It's about how the furniture is set up to make your environment the type of collaborative environment that you want. Now, that's why, for example, I like flat floor and risers because it helps me do the things that I want to do with minimal working and moving things during class or after class has started. That doesn't mean that yours has to be like that. Let's say, for example, you want to start your school year with your sections of your choir getting really tight and connected with their sound, but the way they rehearse together. So maybe that means on the first days of school, they come into the classroom and you've got 8 chairs in 4 circles because you've got 8 sopranos and 8 altos and 8 tenors and 8 basses. And you've got 4 circles created on the floor out of chairs. And they know exactly which one of those chairs is theirs, and they come in ready to go. That just would be an example of how your room wouldn't look like mine, but it could still accomplish the same thing. Do not over-arrange or over-decorate your room for the opening of school. It can be overwhelming. This is just his opinion. Your room should be neat and pleasant, and don't spend time making it the ultimate room you want by back to school night. Don't bother having the learning center, classroom, library, or resource center complete. You don't need a learning center on the first day of school. Wait a week or so after the students have classroom rules and procedures and routines down pat before you allow them to work at the learning center. So this is, again, a general education classroom that he's talking about, but I can think of tons of ways that this would apply to us. If I'm setting up my choir room for the first day of school and my choir library is unorganized, that's okay. I want to get the classroom ready first. And if we never get enough time, paid time to organize our classrooms. So I'm not going to freak out because there are some things on a shelf somewhere in the room that are not, first day of school ready or back to school night ready or whatever it is. I want to make sure that the classroom and its furniture and its things that are on the wall that are critical to the instruction on day one are ready. So in my case, it would be my computer for my projector is working. The projector's got a new bulb. The speakers are working so that the audio that I want to play comes through. My risers are set up in the right position. The piano is tuned. All of those types of things. The sheet music has been ordered in advance. It's already hole punched. It's got folder numbers on it. We are ready to go on day one with all of the things so that we are not scrambling around. Now, I am also an advocate of not necessarily programming your whole first semester before you've ever met your kids. So this is maybe that sheet music being ready means one song. Like on the first day of school, we've got one song. And that way, when just like in my first part of this series, we've worked through a sample version of a choir rehearsal, and we've got something that they can grab and look at. Or as I mentioned, projected on the screen, something like that. But we've got some way to show them the learning materials on day one so that they know what to expect. More things to consider here from the book. Count the number of desks and chairs needed. So in my case, that'd be risers. could be chairs for you. Arrange to have damaged furniture replaced and sufficient furniture brought into the room. Ask for needed items and well ahead of time. One story. So this makes me, I have to tell this story. My very first year teaching, I was teaching in a freshman center that had just been built. It was in a different school than I currently teach at. And so I walked in on the first day of school at this brand new building. This was the first time I had ever been in the classroom, was the first day of school. What a nightmare, right? So because of the construction schedule, I couldn't even go in prior to the day that the kids came in. So I had to walk in the same day that they did. And I walk into this brand new choir room, it's beautiful, to find that the only things in the room were a set of chairs, a desk, like a teacher desk, a computer. This was like, 2003, like a desktop computer, and some pencils. That was it. The entire materials. There was no piano. It was a choir room. Like it was built to be the choir room. There was no piano. And so I walked to the office. And again, this is the opposite of what the Harry Wong book says should happen, right? I had read the Harry Wong book by this point. This was part of my undergrad training. So I'm panicked because I don't have the things that I need, and it's the first day of school. So I go into the office and I say, "Where's the piano for the choir room?" And the building secretary says, "The what? The piano? I don't think there is a piano." So I start panicking. And of course, I have to get a first day of school for a choir class with no piano. And this is back before I was an a cappella choir teacher. If I walked into that situation now, I would know all kinds of things to do. If I had to start a choir class with no piano, I would pull out a pitch app or start with a random pitch out of my brain, and we would do all kinds of stuff. And I would fill up that time from bell to bell with exciting music learning with no keyboard. But I did not have that skill set at 22. So that was terrifying. All right, back to this list here. Administrators and custodians are truly helpful people, and quality education for the children, they're involved in that as much as you are. Get to know them, and you'll discover that they are competent, cooperative, and compassionate and helpful. They are not the ogres the negative teachers want you to believe they are. They will assist you with your needs. Desks don't have to be in traditional rows, or chairs don't have to, like I mentioned, they don't have to be in a traditional choir formation. Get creative. Figure out some way to put kids in a way that makes them think about the way they sound together. Place students' desks where students can easily see, or chairs, can easily see you during the whole class. Now, if you're doing circles, which I've mentioned that a few times now because I love circles as well, then that means I'm probably walking around. Or I'm not conducting at all because I want them in circles so that they conduct each other. So that's another option. Keep high traffic areas clear. So one thing is we don't let kids bring their backpacks out into the room. We make them line the wall with the backpacks so that our rehearsal space is clear. Have a strategic location ready for students who need to be isolated from the rest of the class if there are any types of behavior issues that you might run into. So these are all kind of listed in an order of priorities. So as I mentioned, if your choir library is not done by the first day of school, don't stress. Do all these things first. And then next, once all these other things are done, then we start to consider the other parts of our room. We prepare the wall. Yes, there are going to be critical things you need on the wall at the beginning. So, for example, you might not have one of my reading ropes on your wall that explains and helps kids visualize all the components that they have to master in order to become a good music reader, which I highly recommend. It's my biggest selling item on choralosophy.com/shop. People are putting it up all over the place. But is that a first day of school conversation? Probably not. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of how our brain works when we read music until further into the school year. So that's not something you have to have on the wall on the first day of school. Although the sign you see behind me, "Thank you for your mistake," up there, that might be a good first day of school. Why? Because it might be one of those mantras you start to instill at the very beginning of the school year, especially with all the big loud noises and, hey, we're going to try to read this music and we might make a mistake and, oh, no, who cares? If that becomes part of your ethos in your class, then those types of wall hangings, what is the bare minimum? So for me, the bare minimum is some type of a mantra like that. It doesn't have to be mine, although I think it's a pretty cool sign, but also solfege hand signs. That's day one, because not every kid that I teach has done this before. So that's up there. And they've got demonstrations. They can mimic the signs that they see on the wall. And then we also have some classroom expectations, fire drill type stuff, the nitty gritty. And that's the things that I would say have to be there for day one, because they're actually going to be used and referenced. But once we get past day one, then we can think about more stuff. We can think about a bulletin board and the types of things that you would want to have on it. Classroom procedures, individual duties assigned to students, a calendar, a clock, emergency information, maps of the building, schedules, menus, charts, decorations, birthdays, student work, all the different types of things that it is that you might want to display. These things can kind of grow organically throughout your school year. which I think is actually natural and normal. The students don't expect all of their work to be displayed on the first day. So we can save those things. And I would encourage us to not be super formulaic about it either, because our bulletin boards could also be a reflection of the students that are in the room. They don't necessarily have to be the place from which we preach. They can be a reflection of the student work. Hey guys, what do you want on the bulletin board? What should we be putting up there? Do you guys have anything cool that you've done with your music that we could display, etc.? So these are all conversations that I think personally that our classes and our choirs can be involved in. It could be displaying a future concert theme. I do a pop show at the end of the year that has a theme. Maybe that could go up on my board as, hey, don't forget the pop show at the end of the year is going to be about blank, and just things that we want to generate ideas about. Now, at the end of the chapter, he lists the things effective teachers do, similar to in the last chapter, but for time, I'm going to move to one of them because I think is the most choir specific and it relates to us very, very closely. An effective teacher maximizes proximity to the students, which is again why I recommend risers instead of chairs. My total distance from my face to the face of the other kids is dramatically shorter distance than when 80 kids are spread out in chairs on a floor, or having to climb upstairs to get to them at the back of a room and see and hear be able to give authentic real-time feedback to the students is really, really important, especially in our vocal music context, because if we're too far away from the kid, that becomes too easy for them to hide their sound. So I would encourage you to consider that in the setup of your classroom. Chapter 13 is how to introduce yourself to your class. And there's some really great ideas. I recommend going to the book for the majority of them. I'm just going to say a few things about it here. Right or wrong, this is the key idea of the chapter. Right or wrong, accurate or not, your reputation will precede you. The way you introduce yourself on the first day can determine how much respect and success you will have for the rest of the school year. This, of course, is a project over the course of our career, but whether you want it to or not, your reputation will precede you, even before you see your first students. Your success at winning their respect and attention may have already been predetermined by your reputation. If you have a good reputation, the students will enter the classroom with high expectations, and this will work to your benefit. Building a reputation starts with your first day and continues from there. A good reputation opens doors for you, and if you have a good reputation, students will flock to you. Exhibit integrity and honesty and be approachable. The buzz of the students will reflect those positive traits. If you have a poor reputation, the students will enter with low expectations, and this will be to your detriment. Now, this is tough love here from Mary Wong, but it's true. But it is absolutely true, is we, in many ways, set up the culture of our classrooms in terms of our choir programs because we are so public, our work is public, that we do a lot of pre-first day of school expectation setting with the kids who may or may not choose to do our class. I had kids at my first school that chose to quit choir because they found out that I was going to make them actually do work. But I also had kids come back and rejoin the choir who had quit previously because they found out that I was going to make them actually do work. So we are selecting for the type of students that we have, that we end up with the work that we do ahead of time, for good or for bad. I think that's not an avoidable thing. Other recommendations here that he gives, and I definitely echo them, is send a letter home to parents before school begins. Of course, an email nowadays. Tell the parents what it is that you're looking forward to doing with the kids, why you're excited to get started, the things that you want them to know that their kids will get out of this experience. And of course, later, as the year progresses, you can get into the nitty-gritty of rubrics and test scores and all of those types of things. But it's important to project that gratitude and that excitement that they are there at first. And of course, the students need communication from you at the very beginning of the year. Connect before the school year starts if you can. If there's a way to communicate to them, like at a back to school night or whatever, there can be emails to school lists whenever you get those. There can be, nowadays especially, there could be a Bitmoji of you that talks to them, or I don't know what. But there's all kinds of fun ways that you could introduce yourself before they even walk into the room. Now this one, I find this one silly. It says, visit the home of each student before school begins. Yeah, no thanks. So I find my first area of major disagreement. I'm not going to go to kids' homes one by one and visit before the school year begins. I've got 220 students. But that is neither here nor there. The book goes into some nitty-gritty on how to set up your student or your first day introductions, things you should say, things you should not say. But I'm not going to insult your intelligence with those. I think you can figure that kind of stuff out. Although if you're a brand new teacher, this is why I would recommend the book. It goes to a little bit level of detail that would be helpful for a beginning teacher. Chapter 14 is how to arrange and assign seating. In my case of having risers, how do I arrange standing? But it doesn't really matter if you're a chair person, that's fine. But either way, I would still recommend assigned seating or standing every day in your choir class, every single day. It can be different. In fact, I would also recommend having multiple standing charts or seating charts, but that they get used to, even on the first day of school, having to look for where their name is on the chart. So whatever system it is that you have, that can be something that they start to learn how to do from day one. So in my classroom, some of you, if you've seen online, you've seen my big screen. Day one, there is a standing chart on the screen. And that gives me the opportunity to, one, convey to them that, yes, it matters that you are in the right spot. If we accomplish nothing else on the first day of school, that's pretty important in training for my larger choirs. Okay, so even in the smaller choirs, they know that it's important that they're in the right spot. And yes, if they're 6 feet away from the right spot, they're still going to hear about it. Nope, that's actually not your spot. Go back over here. Okay. And that they start to learn that it matters, but then they also start to learn how to read your system, whatever that is, for showing them what the seating chart is. So I put just a Google spreadsheet up on the screen, shows row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4 of the wing or risers in my room, or floor if we need to use the floor as well. And their names are spread out in block formation, and it's very, very easy to read. They're confused and disoriented at first, but we're able to get through that pretty quickly as one of our opening activities each day. Now, of course, if you've worked with teenagers before, you will know that when there is assigned seating or standing, they will react in one of two ways. They will either follow your request very politely, or they will grumble and argue over everything you're asking them to do and act super confused and like you're the worst person ever for assigning their spot. But they will get over that. Yes, I'm recording. I can't right now. I'm recording. Chapter 15 is how to start class effectively. The Harry Wong book says have an assignment ready and posted when the students enter the classroom, which in a choir class or a music class, an assignment in a traditional sense could be like a bell ringer of some kind, a music theory worksheet, a 3-minute theory assignment could be a possibility. A 3-minute theory, of course, is an affiliate here on the show. If 3minutetheory, you get a discount if you use Choralosophy at checkout. It's an awesome way to create those types of bell ringer assignments. But for me, that's not when I use that kind of thing. I don't use that as the bell's ringing. My assignment, so to speak, as soon as the bell rings is we are singing. We are up, we are body aligned, we are full energy right away at the very beginning. I introduce myself to class by singing, and we start that from the very beginning. Now, part of that is motivated, I guess you could say, by my 44-minute class time. If I had 90 minutes like Maria Ellis does, maybe I wouldn't do it that way. I don't know. But that's the routine that I like because it sets a tone that we are here for singing. The reason we're here is for singing. And just like if I was teaching French, I would greet the kids in French because we are here to learn French. That is the purpose of this class. And so in my environment, the bell rings, I am ready at the piano, or I'm ready on the conductor's podium to get the kids up and singing. For any of the more traditional assignments, the same thing is important, that it's done in the same way. They know where to find them every day. If there are assignments, they know how to access them. They know how to get a good grade on them, which is important. We talked about that earlier. What am I being asked to do in order to get that grade? That's to learn to hit that objective. So these things are part of our structures and our routines. There are some details in that chapter that I would recommend that I'm not going to talk about here, and that includes chapter 16 as well, which is how to take roll. I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot because it's so different at every place. However, in choir, if our standing charts are ready when class starts, our seating charts are ready, and they are very detailed in terms of who is supposed to be where and where are there supposed to be empty places. For example, if there's an empty chair or an empty slab on a riser, etc., if those are all there, guess what's already done when class starts? The roll. You can take roll almost instantly. Now, if you're one of those teachers who uses taking roll as a way to get to know kids, then sure, at the very beginning of the school year, you might do it what I call the old-fashioned way, which is to read every single name. And here, and oh, hi, how are you? You might incorporate that time in, which is totally fine. But on a regular basis, the kids know that you are in your standing position when the bell rings. That's how we take roll. We know where you are. And that is a huge time saver. And it's also a way to instill in them that it is important, again, that you are where you're supposed to be, so that I, the teacher, can start right away without having to wait for you. Highly recommended. We're going to stop part 2 there for now. Part 3, I'm really excited about part 3 because it's one of my biggest nerd aspects, which is how we set up and communicate our positive expectations for kids. Positive meaning what you're going to do. Here's what you're not allowed to do. but here are the things you're going to do, and you're going to be really good at these things. And how do we communicate that through our grading system and the way we record and communicate our grades? Stick around for part 3 of the series, which will be a couple weeks from now. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. 1, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.